The tires didn't screech. They hummed, a low rhythmic vibration against the cracked pavement of 125th Street that sounded less like a car and more like a heartbeat slowing down. The rope was industrial grade, coarse. It didn't snap when the weight hit the end of it. It groaned. In the rear-view mirror, there is only a blurred shape, a man who minutes ago had a name, a family, and a standing in the neighborhood. Now he is just friction. He is the sound of wool and skin meeting asphalt at 40 miles per hour. The driver doesn't look back. He grips the wheel, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the dim glow of the streetlights. He thinks he's sending a message. He thinks the sparks flying from the man's belt buckle against the road are lighting a fire that will burn the king of Harlem down. Silence in the back seat, just the wind whistling through a cracked window. The smell of burnt rubber and copper fills the cabin. Every block is a decade of progress erased. Every turn is a scream swallowed by the roar of the engine. The driver pulls over near the edge of the park. He breathes. He waits for the silence to settle. He thinks he's won because he's the one holding the keys. But in Harlem, the man with the keys is just a valet for the man who owns the street. And the street has eyes that don't blink. If you're drawn to the untold power stories of Harlem and the men who ruled without noise, you're already in the right place. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The history books will tell you about the riots. They'll tell you about the politicians and the grand speeches made on the steps of the churches, but they buried the ledgers. They erased the names of the men who sat in the back of the barber shops, the ones who decided who ate and who starved. There's a version of this night that was scrubbed from the precinct logs, a version where the blood wasn't just cleaned up, but returned to its sender with interest. You were told that power comes from the barrel of a gun. You were lied to. Power comes from the phone call made before the gun is even loaded. Tonight, we look at the files they tried to burn. This story will change everything you think you know about how a city is actually governed. Before the suit, before the reputation, there was just a man named Ellsworth. He sat in a small room on 126th, watching the steam rise from a cup of black coffee. His hands didn't shake, but his mind was a cage of static. He felt the weight of 10,000 people on his shoulders, people who looked to him not for a handout, but for a sense of order in a world that offered them none. He knew what they said about him. He knew the fear he inspired. But in the quiet hours, when the city held its breath, he wondered if the shadow he cast was becoming too heavy for him to carry. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being irrelevant. He was afraid of the moment the leash would snap and the chaos would swallow the only home he ever loved. The whispers started at dawn. They didn't travel through the newspapers. They moved through the steam of the laundries and the clink of the milk bottles. No one spoke his name out loud. They just looked toward the top floor of the Hotel Teresa. A man had been dragged. An insult had been carved into the very dirt of Harlem. The neighborhood waited, not for an explosion, but for a shift in the air. When he finally stepped out onto the sidewalk, he didn't have an army. He didn't carry a weapon. He simply stood there, adjusting his cuffs, looking at the spot where the tires had left their mark. The crowd parted like water. It wasn't respect. It was an acknowledgement of a gravity they couldn't escape. The driver was hidden in a basement in the Bronx, protected by men who thought their zip code made them safe. They sat around a card table, laughing about the message they sent. They thought the distance between them and 125th Street was a fortress. What they didn't know was that the map of New York was already folded in Ellsworth's pocket. This is where everything changed. The decision wasn't made with anger. It was made with the cold, clinical precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. He didn't send a hit squad. He sent a single man with a package. The tension in the city climbed. Every siren felt like a countdown. Every shadowed alley held the ghost of the man behind the car. The men in the Bronx stopped laughing when the lights in their building went out. Not the whole block, just their floor. The payoff was delayed. Hours turned into a day, then 2. He let them marinate in their own adrenaline. He let them imagine the worst, knowing that their imagination could never compete with his reality. He stretched the silence until it screamed. When the car finally returned to the Bronx, it didn't arrive with fanfare. It was parked quietly at the curb, the engine still warm. When the men went down to check it, they found the trunk wasn't locked. The reveal was calm. There was no note, there was no shouting. There was only the driver, or what remained of him, neatly arranged in the space where the spare tire should have been. It was a masterpiece of controlled fury. It was public. It was undeniable. It was the moment the rules of the game were rewritten in a language everyone understood. Word didn't just spread, it hardened into legend. The story of the driver became the bedtime story for every 2-bit hustler who thought they could challenge the crown. The enemies didn't retreat, they simply stopped existing in the same reality as the man they called Bumpy. The streets weren't just quiet, they were obedient. Power isn't about the strength of the blow, it's about the silence that follows it. It's about the foresight to know that a man's life is a small price to pay for a decade of peace. Control is not seen, it is felt in the absence of chaos. The man who was dragged is forgotten. The man who drove him is a ghost. But the man who sent him back, his name stays in the brick and the mortar, heavy, final, unforgettable. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe for the stories history tried to bury.